Hi, I'm Vince Molinari, and welcome to Fintech TV. We're broadcasting from the iconic New York Stock Exchange, and I am extra honored with a special guest today, the President of the United Nations 78th General Assembly, His Excellency, Dennis Francis. Dennis, I'd like to welcome you to the show, welcome you to the iconic New York Stock Exchange, who in fact is a member of the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative at the UN. So it converges on so many points of interest for us here at Fintech TV. And as I said, truly honored to have you with us today, sir.
Thank you, Vince. It's a great pleasure for me to be here.
Well, I want to jump right in. I want to talk about the first ever United Nations General Assembly Sustainability Week coming up April 15th through the 19th.
Yes.
Big launch, first ever of anything is always important, no less anything coming out of the General Assembly. Maybe you can share a little bit about it.
Sustainability Week is the consolidation of 5 mandates that the General Assembly has to engage in discussions on a number of sectors: tourism, transportation, infrastructure, energy, and of course debt sustainability. So we decided to consolidate them all into one compact week of high-level engagement to discuss issues related to how to turbocharge the Sustainable Development Goals using these particular sectors with a view to enhancing sustainability all around the world.
Well, amen to that. I couldn't agree with it more. And when we begin to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, achieving the goals of 2030, engaging private sector to help in that initiative, I love the theme, choose sustainability, to start off and wrap it all together. Talk to me about why you chose that and why that's such an important wrapper.
It's crucial, really, because the fact of the matter is that we need to rethink how we produce and consume resources on the planet. We know from the evidence, the scientific evidence, that the planet is in peril. Climate change, loss of biodiversity, sea level rise, all of these things are impacting our daily lives. Forest fires, raging forest fires, droughts, famine, etc. The southwest of the United States, for example, as you know, the water supply there is not what it used to be. And so the issue is, how can we use resources, the natural assets that the planet has gifted us, how can we use them more sensibly, more consistent with the limits of the environment, in order to ensure, number one, the longevity of our civilization on the planet, and number two, that future generations will be able to have these resources as part of their assets, so that they can use them and enjoy them as well. And it's very important, because if you think of climate change and the need to decarbonize the atmosphere, which is very urgent, before we came on camera, we were talking about the fact that March was the hottest month on record. We can do something about that.
Well, and I think that's what I love about Choose Sustainability. It's the action, it's our own personal responsibility.
Exactly.
And, you know, when we think about future generations, and let's start there and move backward, right? If we don't preserve our natural resources, if we don't even move from conservation to regeneration, right, we're not going to have a planet.
Exactly.
So I would love, and I know we can talk for hours and we've got limited time to move through some things, but I'd love to dive in and pull on some of the threads of the initiative. So when we talk about debt and debt sustainability, often conversations don't associate debt with sustainability, right? So, you know, part of the education with Fintech TV is creating awareness and educating on topics that aren't spoken about. So I would love if you can share with us around debt sustainability.
Okay. So as you know, we are promoting the Sustainable Development Goals, and the time frame for this is by the year 2030. The goals, unfortunately, are woefully off track. A number of things have happened since 2015, when the goals were declared, that have frustrated progress with the goals. We've had a pandemic. There are now wars raging around the world. We've had global food insecurity. We've had inflation. And so we need to refocus, reboot, and supercharge the SDGs. But there's a whole category of developing countries, a fairly large number. The least developed countries, the landlocked developing countries, and the small island developing states that are hard-pressed to finance the SDGs simply because they exist with an extraordinary overhang of foreign debt. Now they must repay that debt. And when they pay the interest alone on that debt, they've got very little money left over to invest in the SDGs. They are therefore caught in what we refer to as a debt trap, because they cannot generate enough resources internally, both to pay the interest on the debt and to invest in things like education, health, housing, national security. And so they are facing a situation of debt unsustainability. It's just not practical. They will be stuck in the underdevelopment situation for many, many decades. And so what is being proposed, among the things being proposed, is, and it's interesting that we're having this conversation here, because what is being proposed is the reform of the international financial system to allow these countries better terms and conditions of borrowing so that they can, while paying the interest on the debt, there will be sufficient resources left to help them, to free them to invest in development. At the moment, they are unable to invest in development.
And there's so much within that that I'd love to comment on.
Yes.
But I think you're so spot on. Fundamentally, it has to be repaid in order to have a credit worthiness to go forward.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
But when we talk about the disproportionate effects to certain nations, whether LDCs, landlocked, Pacific Island, who are suffering disproportionately, who are the least contributors of climate change, it's our responsibility to help.
I'm glad you said that. It is.
So when we think about it as a fundamental tenet of perhaps a reorganization, what will we do with a company or an individual? We have to reduce the interest payment to allow for payment. And if the impact of that is, my goodness, we can't educate, we can't feed, we can't grow that nation, then what are we actually doing?
Exactly.
So I couldn't applaud you more for the initiative.
Those countries would be consigned to a situation of perpetual debt and lack of development, in which case we can expect there to be large numbers of people living in absolute poverty, with nothing to eat, unable to educate their children, creating a greater divide, development divide between the global north and the global south. And that too is unsustainable. Because we're trying, the UN's brand, one of the key brands of the UN, as you know, is peace. And when that development divide widens increasingly, it poses a real threat to global peace and security.
Absolutely, and it's probably a good segue to another point that I want to bring forward when we talk about technological innovation and how that advances the SDGs. And, and aside from fundamentally closing the digital divide for education and healthcare, etc., how do you look at technology and innovation advancing the SDGs?
Oh, it's a no-brainer. Technology and innovation, first of all, it drives growth. Technology and innovation drives growth. I mean, you know, in my former dispensation, I was ambassador to the World Intellectual Property Organization. And we know that every time a new patent is filed, this is a signal of coming growth in the economy, because the investment will follow. So we need growth. We absolutely need growth. We need great growth. but we need it to be sustainable. And therefore, the role of technology and innovation in that whole calculus is extremely important. Of course, we'd like to see some of that technology transferred to developing countries in order to assist and support them to boost their economies and their rates of growth and job creation, so as to shrink rather than increase the development divide, as we were saying before. The problem that exists now is that we are seeing that development divide, the difference between the haves and the have-nots, growing wider apart rather than being closed. And so technology transfer and innovation is extremely important. In fact, it's central to implementation of the SDGs.
I fully agree, and in fact, if there was another SDG to be added, it may be indeed technology and innovation from my vantage point, but that weaving through all of the SDGs and kind of defines and epitomizes collaboration and partnership in SDG 17, and where it all comes through for me.
Yes. Now, the thing with technology is, of course, that it drives costs down. It builds competitiveness. And so it's good for growth, it's good for the economy, it's good for job creation. And the SDGs really will need to be built based on great competitiveness, building competitive sectors, whatever they might be, that are sustainable over the long term. Rather than having the boom and bust cycles, more stable growth, so that you avoid increasing poverty. As it stands at the moment, there are approximately 860 million people living hopelessly in poverty. Hopelessly. An important dimension of the discussions next week will be on sustainable tourism. In fact, we've broken it into two parts: sustainable tourism and resilient tourism. There's a subtle difference.
Please share.
Tourism is an extremely lucrative and booming global industry. I believe it accounts for $1.4 trillion worth of value. It's extremely important for a number of countries, not just in the global south, in the global north as well. New York City is a great destination, tourist destination. But tourism also, if it is not managed in a smart way, can account for damage to the environment, and can therefore be unsustainable. It uses a lot of resources, tourism, for example, energy. It uses, in many parts of the world, the people who work in the tourism industry directly are not paid very well. They're not paid competitively, very low wages, etc. And so sustainable tourism really is the way to go, because you're then selling an experience to a traveler who is a keen advocate of sustainability and of the environmental limits of the planet. So that, for example, the inputs in that industry, and they use lots of inputs because they're constructing new plant all the time. If the industry switches to sustainable consumption, for example, so that its procurement patterns reflect the need to be climate sensitive, to be environmentally sensitive, and to avoid unnecessary danger to the natural environment, that would be the way to go. If people are paid a fair day's wage, that would be sustainable. If, for example, the hotel plan, the rooms, when the guest leaves the room, the lights go out automatically, the water in the sink gets turned off automatically, that would make a contribution to sustainable tourism. Resilient tourism, on the other hand, is working to ensure that after an external shock, for example, COVID-19, or perhaps a tsunami, the recovery time for the industry to get back on its feet and functioning is relatively short. It means, therefore, using construction techniques that are advanced and that are resilient to natural disasters. That's the resiliency dimension of things. Because as you know, in many parts of the world, right here in the United States, in the Midwest, tornadoes are happening all the time. And with resilient construction techniques, perhaps some of the structures that are damaged might not withstand the level of damage that they do now. We're also promoting infrastructure next week. And in that regard, look what happened to the bridge in Baltimore. The collapse of that bridge, as I was seeing on the news, will impact more than the city of Baltimore and more than the state of Maryland. There will be a ripple effect across the U.S. economy, because that port handles goods and services coming to and leaving the United States and being sent to other states in the Union. But it is also likely to have an effect on global supply chains, because it's an international trade relies on the port of Baltimore when goods come to the United States. And so I'm aware that the U.S. government has a commitment to renew infrastructure. There was a bill in the Congress many years ago under the current administration to do that. That's a great thing, because that is going to give an enormous boost to the U.S. economy and perhaps to the world economy as well. But doing it sustainably, building resilience into it, is going to mean stronger infrastructure, better capable of withstanding external shocks, and therefore minimizing damage and minimizing the cost of having to rehabilitate and rebuild infrastructure. And that's the sustainability part of it.
Well, and you did it so eloquently, I have to say. When we look at choose sustainability and looking at the interconnectivity of all your tracks, just as the globe is interconnected, if we think about the advancements in technology, to the resiliency, to tourism, to all the components, it's probably a great segue as you talk about infrastructure, tourism, to sustainable transportation weaved into the mix. And can you give us a little insight there?
Yes. Well, of course, transportation is crucial to any economy. Growth would not be possible, economic growth would not be possible without access to an efficient, cost-effective, and affordable transportation. Transportation is an industrial sector in itself, an economic sector, but it is also an important input in the pricing of goods and services. And so the cost at which transportation is available to the business community and to the general public becomes an important consideration. But sustainable transport is going to make transportation services available and do so in a way that does not harm or endanger the natural environment. And so part of what needs to happen would be to shift, to transition progressively, certainly by the year 2050, to the use of more green energy in transportation systems. So when I say to you, choose sustainability, for example, on a practical basis, you can make a contribution, everybody can. Because if you were to leave your car home 1 day per week and take public transport, you would be helping That's a sustainable action that you can take as an individual to strengthen sustainability and help to save our environmental assets.
And I'd love if you can share a little bit more on those, because incumbent in all of us is our personal responsibility and the thoughtfulness of one day of public transport. I've heard you talking about shutting the water when you're brushing your teeth.
That's correct.
Right? These daily
Little
activities,
things.
right? And the aggregate become very meaningful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad you said that, because for this to work well, we need all hands on board. At the individual level, the household level, the community level, the local government level, the state level, the national level, and at the global level. You know, the Sustainable Development Goals are all about lifting people up, giving them hope for a brighter future based on fairness, based on justice, based on respect for human rights and human dignity, because these are the things that unify us and give our lives quality. And so, you know, the link between civilization and the planet has to be holistic and smart. So we are not at all promoting the abandonment of things we do in our daily lives. Yeah, but in our lifestyles, we make decisions, we make choices every day, sometimes without thinking about it. Spare a thought. The next time you decide, I'm going to go to the gym, and the gym is maybe 10 minutes away with a brisk walk, but you drive there. Think about the effect. Unless you're driving an electric vehicle or a hybrid, think about the effect on the environment and the future of introducing additional carbon into the atmosphere, because we are paying the price already. Climate change is not about the future, it's happening now. That is why we are seeing such virulence in climate patterns, in the hurricanes and the cyclones that affect our daily lives, the raging fires that seem to be out of control and happening in places where they never before happened. Why the levels of dams across the world, including here in the United States, have fallen significantly, because rainfall is a limited asset. We are getting less and less rainfall and less water. Water is becoming increasingly a scarce resource. We need to manage it sensibly and smart in order to ensure that we do not run out of water. That's the sustainability of it all. It's lifestyle changes, it's corporate changes, it's household changes and shifts that brings sustainability to the very center of the way in which we use resources and produce the things that we need on this planet.
Well, His Excellency Dennis Francis, I thank you truly for spending all the time sharing, educating with us, for your leadership. I wish you all of the luck in the world in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. The first ever Sustainability Week at the United Nations General Assembly as an epic moment in time in the advancement of the SDGs and the goals of 2030. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it all.
Thank you so very much. It's been my pleasure.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you, sir.